The untold struggles behind iconic inventions, how Wi-Fi, smartphones, and more were born. Introduction. Innovation is never a straight line. Behind every game-changing invention, there's a long road paved with failures, setbacks, and moments where the idea almost died. In this video, we dive deep into the untold struggles and unexpected breakthroughs that gave birth to some of the world's most iconic inventions. From Wi-Fi and the first smartphone to the creation of GPS and the touchscreen, the stories behind these technologies are far more dramatic than you might imagine. 1. The birth of Wi-Fi, a story of accidental discovery and long struggles. The story of Wi-Fi begins in an unlikely place, the world of radio waves. But it almost didn't happen. Wi-Fi was actually born from a technology called wireless broadband, and its true inventor was Dr. John O'Sullivan, an Australian scientist. What most people don't know is that O'Sullivan and his team were actually trying to detect black holes in space. Their work was focused on understanding how to eliminate interference in signals sent through the air. However, through a series of accidents, they developed the technology that would ultimately lead to Wi-Fi. But even after they made this accidental discovery, it took years for the technology to be recognized. In the early 1990s, Wi-Fi was seen as a side project, and even tech giants were skeptical about its potential. In fact, the technology didn't take off until Apple integrated Wi-Fi into the MacBook in 1999. Before that, it was largely ignored by companies who saw wired internet as the future. Fun fact, Wi-Fi didn't even have a cool name when it was first developed. The technology was originally called IEEE 802.11b direct sequence, but in 1999, a marketing company coined the name Wi-Fi because it sounded more marketable. Ironically, it stood for wireless fidelity, but most people still believe it's short for wireless internet. 2. The smartphone revolution, a decade of failures, then success. The struggle. Before Apple's iPhone took the world by storm in 2007, the smartphone was far from being the device we know today. It was actually a series of failed attempts that led to the creation of the modern smartphone. The first smartphone was developed by IBM in 1992, called the Simon Personal Communicator. While it was ahead of its time, it had a clunky design, a short battery life, and was a failure in the market. But IBM's creation sparked the idea of combining a phone with a PDA, personal digital assistant, a concept that would later be perfected. Fast forward to the early 2000s, companies like Microsoft, with its Windows Mobile OS, and Palm, with its Palm Pilot, were all trying to capture the smartphone market, but their devices still lacked the intuitive touchscreens, apps, and user-friendly interfaces that we take for granted today. Apple entered the race with its revolutionary iPhone, which combined a capacitive touchscreen, mobile internet, and the App Store, features no one else had perfected at that time. Fun fact, Steve Jobs almost didn't want to create the iPhone. He believed the market was more interested in iPods than in phones. However, after seeing how consumers were using their devices, he decided to merge the iPod and phone into one product. The iPhone became a game changer because of its revolutionary interface, no physical keyboard and multi-touch capabilities. In fact, Apple was so secretive about the iPhone's development that the team working on it was called Project Purple, and no one was allowed to talk about it. 3. GPS. From military secrets to everyday convenience. The struggle. Imagine navigating without GPS today. Hard, right? But it wasn't always like this. The Global Positioning System, GPS, was originally developed by the US Department of Defense in the 1970s for military purposes. For decades, only the military and a few select organizations had access to this technology. It was restricted and designed to help guide missiles, planes, and ships. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan made the groundbreaking decision to make GPS available to civilians, believing it would be a huge benefit for global navigation. However, the civilian version of GPS was intentionally less accurate than the military version for security reasons. Still, the creation of consumer-grade GPS receivers set the stage for what would eventually become a multi-billion-dollar industry. By the early 2000s, GPS receivers were built into smartphones, cars, and wearable devices, changing how we get from one place to another. Fun fact, the initial GPS satellites were incredibly expensive to launch. One of the early satellites, launched in 1989, cost about $100 million. Nowadays, the cost has drastically dropped, and GPS is now a feature built into most smartphones. The technology is also the reason why apps like Uber can locate your exact position in seconds. 4. The touchscreen. From labs to everyday life. The struggle. The touchscreen, another technology we often take for granted, actually had humble beginnings. The first touchscreen was created in the 1960s by E.A. Johnson in the UK, but it wasn't until the late 1990s that it began to take shape as a mainstream device. Before the touchscreen, devices like phones, computers, and ATMs used physical buttons or keyboards. One of the biggest struggles was creating a touchscreen that was both precise and intuitive. Early prototypes were often slow to respond and lacked the sensitivity required for modern devices. In fact, it took Apple's design team several years of testing and refining the capacitive touchscreen technology, which relies on the electrical conductivity of the human finger. Apple's introduction of the iPhone in 2007 marked the moment when touchscreens went from experimental tech to mainstream. Fun fact, while capacitive touchscreens, like the iPhones, became popular, the first touchscreens were resistive, meaning you had to press harder to register input. Capacitive screens, however, allowed for more sensitive and multi-touch gestures, like pinching and swiping, that we now use every day. Conclusion: the price of innovation. The stories behind these iconic inventions show that innovation is messy, often full of failures, accidents, and long periods of frustration before success. From Wi-Fi's accidental birth to the struggles of creating the smartphone, each of these technologies was born out of trial, error, and perseverance. And they serve as a reminder that behind every polished, world-changing product, there's often a hidden story of struggles and breakthroughs. Call to action: if you love discovering the hidden struggles behind these iconic inventions, hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the surprising history of technology. Drop a comment below to tell us which invention story shocked you the most.